Donald Trump's State of the Union, it's almost as if he's at war with Congress. Imagine what would have happened if they still had a shutdown, this battle going on between the White House and Congress, and he's trying to do his State of the Union address. You can almost imagine Congress stopping him going in to do it because they're so annoyed with his wall proposal.
We are so astonished that Trump is still where he is.
Tell me about it.
How did this man get to be... I mean, he didn't win the popular vote, of course. But, basically there's a lot of talk about how the focusing on the swing states and the people responsible for that, we all know the stories about Cambridge Analytica, are the ones that actually focused on people for the Brexit vote as well.
We've seen a lot of this recently, but at the end of the day, surely you can't say he didn't really win. He is president, and you have to deal with him.
Well, the thing is, I mean, if I can just come in, the problem is the Americans' flawed voting system. I mean, I've been in electoral reform all my life. In Britain's first-past-the-post voting system needs to replace it with something that's more proportional. In America, they've got this electoral college system, which means that you can win enough electoral seats, in the college, and lose the popular vote and still end up as president.
But hang on, the Labour Party used to have an electoral college system as well, with the block votes from the trade unions.
That's not the same as using that to win general elections. I mean, this is the electoral college system we're talking about is each state having so many seats, which may not have necessarily changed. I mean, the only way for America is to have a proper democratic mandate for their presidents is to have one person, one vote. That's got to be the way it works.
I want to send out a ray of hope to people because, this Trump era will end.
Yep.
It is dangerous, it is worrying, but, as we speak, there are women and women of colour, which is fantastic. They're all positioning themselves into major senior posts and people are being elected, and it will come to an end. In a lot of ways, he's an idiot sort of figurehead that's been propped up by the Republicans, but now that, the Democrats have actually got the majority now in the Senate House, haven't they?
Not the Senate, the Republicans, which I can't understand, actually increased their hold in the Senate, but the Democrats have the Congress.
They have the Congress, that's right. Yeah. So therefore, that's why this whole terrible sort of, head-to-head came about, wasn't it? But, I mean, the man isn't capable of actually making proper decisions.
I'm just waiting. I mean, now that at least the Republicans have lost Congress, I'm just waiting for the guy to be impeached. I mean, he's got to be the worst president I've ever witnessed or seen.
One of the things I'd just like to point out is when he goes in there and speaks to Congress, if you have a look at the picture of the American Congress, then there's a sort of backdrop. It's a kind of semicircle where there's a big stage and they all stand up there. And what you've got in front of you is four pillars. Well, at the very back is four pillars. Right in the middle is the flag of the United States, kind of turned on its end and up. But either side is a giant golden fasci, which are these, what the word fascism comes from, which is a load of sticks, axe and 13 rods, which are bound together. This is a symbol for strength in numbers. So if you've got 13 people together, they can do something which maybe one person on their own can't do. So it does rather bother me that there's this enormous fascist symbol in the middle of Congress as Trump is there giving this speech, Mel.
I know, it's very
It's
worrying
not just
indeed.
there, by the way. I had a little look. The George Washington statue at Virginia State Capitol in Richmond, Virginia, is a big statue of him. He's resting on one of these fasci, right? The Abraham Lincoln Memorial, where you can, many people have seen it, he's sitting down on a chair and he's got his hands up. He's got his hands on two fasci. So these are everywhere in American culture. They've been put there. There was a 10-cent coin, the dime, the Mercury dime from the 1940s, which had a fasci on the back. It's also the emblem of the National Sheriff's Association in America, the emblem of the US National Guard, and the seal of the US Courts Administrative Office. So when I see Trump giving his speech there with this in the background, these two fasci in the background, I do wonder how far we've come since the Second World War. But anyway, I mean, this is just symbolism in the background, but there is something a little bit sinister about Trump too.
Well, there certainly is, and the fact that he's been placed in a position with his advisors around him, and we look to those advisors. One of the billionaires, is he called Jeffrey Mercer, the one that bankrolls climate change denial? It's all about Exxon and big business, isn't it? And we're battling here. We're battling with saving the planet, actually, because this Trump is actually he's joining forces with people in Australia. There's a very strong anti-climatic change movement over there. And, the withdrawing from the Paris Agreement is appalling, isn't it? So he's not going to last much longer.
Are there any treaties that Donald Trump has not pulled out of?
I can't think of any.
Very few. He seems to be pulling out of everything. I mean, it is actually alarming how things are going on in America.
It's a race. I mean, how many of the 18 things that court cases that are coming up, not court cases, but, he's been accused of all these different things. And how long can he hold them off with money? How many scandals can he hold off with money?
Well, it's interesting. Apparently, he almost channeled Nixon's State of the Union speech about, saying people should sort of back off him, and then Nixon ended up forced out. Hopefully Trump will be forced out.
Anyway, I mean, we must be balanced on this programme. We always try and be. So we've got to give Donald his say.
Donald.
So here is Donald Trump. So I've got a few clips from his State of the Union speech this week. And firstly, he talks about the wall, the notorious wall.
My administration has sent to Congress a common-sense proposal to end the crisis on the southern border. It includes humanitarian assistance, more law enforcement, drug detection at our ports, closing loopholes that enable child smuggling, and plans for a new physical barrier or wall to secure the vast areas between our ports of entry. In the past, most of the people in this room voted for a wall, but the proper wall never got built. I will get it built. This is a smart, strategic, see-through steel barrier, not just a simple concrete wall. It will be deployed in the areas identified by the border agents as having the greatest need, and these agents will tell you where walls go up, illegal crossings go way, way down.
Yes, this wall is going on and on, isn't it? I think he's backing down a bit, actually, because the funding hasn't been there as easily as he expected.
But a smart wall.
Oh, it's a smart wall. Yes, it's probably one of those virtual walls.
Something called see-through steel. See-through steel.
Yeah, I mean, he's talking nonsense. I mean, obviously it means a sort of a fence, like sort of, how you get a sort of wire fences and sort of... But see-through steel, you can't see... Glass you can see through, clear plastic you can see through. Steel is a solid...
Yeah, but he's talking about a fence, isn't he?
He's talking about a fence, basically. And also, he's also admitting it's not going to go across end to end. So it's going to waste a bucket load of money that could be better spent tackling poverty in America. And it's still going to have gaps in it, and that's where, if people are that determined, they'll still get through those different gaps. If you really want to cut down migration or economic migration, you need to address the issues
that are prompting those
that
people. That's
people
right.
want to leave. If people's lives are good enough where they live, they won't need to leave. If they're being driven out by war, they're being driven out by poverty or economic collapse, then...
Actually, I mean, I visited Mexico, gosh, this is probably 20 years ago, and met some of the people who were heading up to go into the United States. And I said, well, why are you doing it? It's aventura, they said. It's an adventure. And also, they were the idea was to make some money. Pure and simple, much more money to be made in America than there was in Mexico. So you can't really blame them. I suppose it's a similar situation with those people in Africa who are coming to Europe to try and make money, Fabian.
Yeah, and also climate change could make certain parts of the planet uninhabitable, which is only going to put more pressure on migration, because people are then going to be wanting to leave the bits that are no longer habitable, no longer able to sustain any kind of agriculture, and put even more pressure on the bits that remain habitable,
I mean, the problems of displaced people are being caused by the nations that are complaining the most about having to receive displaced people. You know, you have to tackle... It's no good, the last plaster, isn't it?
No.
Of trying to do that. You have to actually tackle... I mean, Germany was fantastic and has taken in over 1 million immigrant people, you know, in need, fleeing from terrible situations.
Okay, so this is the chance to take a step back from all this. What should be happening in the world to make sure that those places that are becoming impossible for people to live in, where they have to go somewhere else just to make a living, what can we do to make those places livable again?
Such a huge question, isn't it?
Well, perhaps it's like Venezuela could go down the same route, because obviously it's quite clear that America's after intervening in Venezuela, because they want the oil.
The largest resource of crude oil in the whole of the world. Funny, isn't it? I don't think the United States has got a very good reputation for doing things in South America. We're going to get on to
Venezuela in a minute, but this question of who is responsible for making a mess in these countries, a lot of the time, you're right, I'm quite sure it is big Western countries, powerful Western countries.
We shouldn't
do interfere.
I think the neoliberalist model has got to stop. We're coming to crisis points economically, climatically, in all these different ways, and it's not working. Capitalism isn't working. So I really think that we're coming up to crunch time, because now we have the internet where people are becoming more and more aware, and I'm actually putting my trust in the next generations. I think we have great hope, and there's something called Extinction Rebellion, isn't there? Have you seen this?
Yeah.
The youngster that's talking about this, and it's spreading everywhere very quickly indeed. And I think the next generation who's going to have to live with the legacies of these terrible things that have been going on, you know, the answers are there.
Well, what irritates me is Trump's talking there about things like drug detection at our ports. Well, what about drug detection at US military bases, where many people believe most of the drugs around the world are being flown around by the military? I mean, we had the whole business of Oliver North being prosecuted for this. Then he was pardoned by... This is the Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah.
Then he was pardoned for it. So I think maybe he's looking in the wrong place if he wants to stop the importation of illegal drugs.
And maybe America needs to learn the lesson. I mean, what happened during Prohibition? You know, when alcohol was banned, you had criminals making an absolute bucket load of money trading in illegal alcohol. And now, you know, so that's now taxed and regulated and controlled. Maybe we need to think long and hard about
we seriously need to decriminalise drugs, without a doubt. All drugs. Portugal has done it, and it's just working beautifully,
well,
isn't it?
we were doing film reviews.
Decriminalise it, not sort of make it sort of, you know, so it's okay to be, you know, but, you know, decriminalise it. So it's regulated, it's dealt with as a medical condition. If you've got a drug addiction problem, it needs to be dealt with as a medical issue, not a criminal thing. There's
a fantastic old black and white film called Key Largo, and it's all to do with drug smuggling in Florida, with Humphrey Bogart and various other... James Cagney, I think, isn't it? And there is a perfect example of the prospect of the ending of Prohibition is put on this guy who's making a load of money out of Prohibition, a gangster, and it's the most horrifying concept in the world to him. He starts banging his fists on the table, goes nuts. How you can't end Prohibition? And of course they did eventually. Now maybe it's time to, you know, take the whole ending of drug prohibition more seriously and just starting to regulate it properly. Anyway, we're getting off the topic slightly, and we will be getting to Venezuela in a minute, I promise you. But before that, we're going to hear what Trump in his State of the Union address said about NATO and Russia. I mean, that's basically us, folks. We're NATO, and bear in mind that we're a bit closer to Russia than he is.
For years, the United States was being treated very unfairly by friends of ours, members of NATO. But now we have secured, over the last couple of years, more than $100 billion of increase in defense spending from our NATO allies. They said it couldn't be done. As part of our military buildup, the United States is developing a state-of-the-art missile defense system. Under my administration, we will never apologize for advancing America's interests. For example, decades ago, the United States entered into a treaty with Russia in which we agreed to limit and reduce our missile capability. While we followed the agreement and the rules to the letter, Russia repeatedly violated its terms. It's been going on for many years. That is why I announced that the United States is officially withdrawing from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF Treaty. Perhaps we really have no choice. Perhaps we can negotiate a different agreement, adding China and others, or perhaps we can't, in which case we will outspend and out-innovate all others by far.
Well, he's getting big rounds of applause there, but he's basically announcing a new
side of the.
He's announcing a new arms race. Really,
it's insane. I mean, I've always been a multilateralist. I think the whole idea that we won't nuke them because they'll nuke us back probably makes sense. But you only need so many missiles for that to be effective. He's talking about spending billions and billions on more and more and more armaments. Far more than you'd actually need to eradicate vaporise the entire planet. It's just completely insane, and it's just
it's just chilling.
It's a morally indefensible use of money that needs to be spent dealing with poverty, dealing with climate change, dealing with.
Well, when I think about his
human needs,
his pussy-grabbing fingers hovering over the red button, it's absolutely horrifying, isn't it? But he does seem to be slowing down. That delivery in his voice. There's something on YouTube at the moment that shows him as a sort of drunken uncle, because if you slow it down any more, it makes even less sense of what he's saying. It's just... Yeah.
The Russians, by the way, are saying that everyone's got it all wrong, that actually the missiles that Trump is talking about don't actually violate the INF Treaty, and you can come and have a good old look at them if you want. Russia demonstrates the missile, claiming no violation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. On the 23rd of January, the Russian Defense Ministry displayed in an expo centre in Moscow its new 9M729 missile, claiming, contrary to US assessments, its characteristics do not violate the terms of the treaty. So, who do you believe on this one, Mal? I mean, the Russians are saying we're not violating the treaty. The Americans are saying, yes, you are, we're pulling out.
Well, I don't know enough about it to have a proper answer, actually, but I mean, if I had to choose between Putin and Trump, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
I don't think we really trust either of them.
No.
What's interesting, though, the irony with all of this is it's alleged that Putin, there was Russian meddling in the American elections.
Yeah.
In which case, they've now got someone who's, wants an arms race with them, which is going to cost them a bucket load of money. Is this really what they wanted? Or what's going on?
Well, look,
surely the way to do with treaties
story
is to
up
have
on the screen here is the Chinese are saying the Russians are correct. They do not violate the INF Treaty. So, I mean, the Chinese aren't ignoring all of this, of course. They're saying, well, hang on a minute, what are you doing? You're trying to start a World War III. The Russians are right, so stop messing about. So I'll put a link. I'll tell you what, if people want to make their own mind up, I'll put a link up on our show page to this evidence the Russians have put forward that they're not breaking this treaty. Anyone would think, Mal, that Trump actually wants a war. Is that feasible, that he would be so bonkers?
I wouldn't put anything past him, to be quite honest. The man thinks that he's completely sort of, right about everything, doesn't he? Yeah. The whole idea about nuclear deterrent, we know that Corbyn, our leader, is actually anti-Trident. And when you think about it, only a genocidal, insane person would actually press a button. And if you got to the point where you were pressing a button, then obviously it wasn't a deterrent and it didn't work anyway. There's here in Bristol, we have a huge sort of, BAC in the arms thing, and there's a huge movement within our party, in actual fact, to turn all those workers, not lose jobs doing those kind of things, but to turn it into, different ways of creating energy, but certainly not weapons that are going to kill us all.
In a way, we did that, didn't we, in the 1970s with Concorde, turning something which was all based on military technology and military research into a cutting-edge bit of civilian.
Well, I remember my late father telling me about what happened in World War II. Both sides had gas bombs. Neither side used them because they knew that the second they started the Germans knew, the Nazis knew that the second they started dropping them on the Allies would drop them back. And that sort of, so,
I mean, how many countries don't have a nuclear?
Some very
183 or something.
Yeah, but some potentially very unstable countries do have them.
Yeah, very frightening indeed.
India, Pakistan both have them.
The Israelis have them, and there's a lot of talk about conflict. We were just hearing last week by one of their ministers saying that that if there was any necessity, they would not flinch to use brute force against Iran. Now that's a nuclear threat that they're making potentially, the Israelis. Then there's also, as you say, India and Pakistan, North Korea as well, which seems to have gone to the back burner. But this is, I mean, it is worrying that suddenly it's becoming almost more possible for nuclear war to happen.
And another thing to bear in mind is we've got a much longer history of intervening. A former global power, we've got a much longer history of intervening that a lot of countries don't have.
I just find it so worrying, actually, that we've had, the Berlin Wall came down, the Cold War ended.
A peace dividend. They said there's going to be a peace dividend now. This is the era of the 1980s, Where is this peace dividend?
What's happening? It's all reversing. And I think the hand of big business is behind it, to be quite honest. And those global concerns about arms, of course, and oil, all of those things, they're the ones that are controlling what's happening in the world at the moment.
Because many people say, and you chat to people, they will tell you, nobody wants a world war. Well, I'm afraid there are some people that do, and they want a world war for profit, because they can make a lot of money out of a war, and they don't necessarily care about millions of people dying. Even I can remember back in a quote. I wasn't around, but back in the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was one of the American generals that said we could win a nuclear war with Russia with no more than expectable losses. Now, those expectable losses were something like 17 million. They reckoned 17 million people would die, but we can win. And so that was Cuba back in 1962, and this does seem to be a little bit a similar sort of moment, actually, to do with moving the missile defence shield closer and closer to Russia, both around the east of Russia and around the west of Russia, coming up to Lithuania. I think it's in the Baltic states, and also in Poland. They're just about to move them into Poland. So we're coming up to another kind of Cuba moment.
It's rather tense, isn't it? My daughter's just come back from Cuba, and she's funny. My daughter, she says she used to be a bit 5% conservative, and she said she's increased to between 10 and 15% now. She said socialism doesn't work, Mum. And I said that's not socialism, it's communism. She said, well, you can't buy anything from the shops, but that's to do with the sanctions from the US, isn't it? But on the other hand, nobody's homeless on the streets in Cuba. Was it 1962 that the the US decided not to trade any more with this island nation, and those sanctions are going on and on.
I think the thing to bear in mind, though, we talk about Cuba, it has got issues. There are human rights issues. There isn't the religious freedom that there should be there, for example. But also, we're not talking about, Labour isn't talking about a, communist system. Even Jeremy Corbyn at conference was talking about a mixed economy. So, the obvious monopolies, water, rail, back in public ownership.
Hang on. Buses. Buses are a big issue in this city.
Buses in this city. So
it's an issue that the Metro Mayor doesn't want to come and talk about on this programme.
Well, it's a real blow for the area that we ended up with a Conservative Metro Mayor, because he's obviously sort of ideologically opposed to actually using any of the powers that we've he could actually have to
With
regulate the
transport
bus.
being public
Anyway,
transport,
we're
main
getting
area
on to the topic of
responsibility.
socialism, which Donald Trump is talking about. But before we do, I'll just say I will put a link up on our show page at thisweek.org.uk to some evidence about this Russian missile. Because I'm looking at it, it does look as if the Russians are saying, here, look, this
Here we are,
is
yeah.
not violating the treaty. What are you talking about, Donald Trump? And, of course, Trump hasn't been to this conference to look at this missile to see if it does violate the treaty. He's just been told, it violates the treaty, Donald, sign here. This is the war has got to start as soon as possible. Anyway, so let's have a listen now to what Donald Trump had to say about socialism.
2 weeks ago, the United States officially recognized the legitimate government of Venezuela and its new president, Juan Guaido. We stand with the Venezuelan people in their noble quest for freedom, and we condemn the brutality of the Maduro regime, whose socialist policies have turned that nation from being the wealthiest in South America into a state of abject poverty and despair.
Sorry, that was actually, it's supposed to carry on to talk about socialism, but what do you make of Venezuela? What he's got to say about that, Mal?
Well, I don't believe a word of it. I actually think that that it's a coup. It's the United States are moving in there because they want control of the oil,
Yeah.
and I think they have caused that situation for those poor people and driven them to the most desperate poverty. There was a word that was used to describe it: screaming. A screaming poverty, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think there's
To
something
make the
just,
economy scream.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful, and it looks a little bit familiar to me.
That's
I mean,
what they did in Argentina, yeah.
Argentina.
The IMF and the Americans said, we're going to make the economy scream.
That's right.
And basically what happened is all of the money that people have put into their savings, whatever, tens of thousands of Argentinian, whatever they are, suddenly disappeared, and people lost all their savings overnight. So
Basically,
that's how you do
theft.
it.
That's theft, basically, isn't it?
Yes, and Chile, of course, another example, but it's not
Yeah.
a very good reputation for what they've been doing in South America and Central America.
Anyway, so
No.
let's just carry on with this Trump speech and hear what he had to say about the socialists.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
I mean, I found this one of the most bizarre bits of the State of the Union. I didn't see it reported elsewhere. But, what is it, Fabian, what is it that Donald Trump's got so much against socialism? Anyway, if America decides it wants to vote for the Socialist Party, which actually the Democrat Party is quite socialist, why can't it do so?
Well, it's obviously Donald Trump doesn't believe in democracy, and he obviously thinks he can, the Republicans just want to hang on to power. That's why they're doing things like voter suppression, trying to stop, reduce polling stations, gerrymander the voting system in America and stuff like that. It's all sort of typical right-wing tricks to try and hang on to power. But you look at the consequences. They've got a for-profit private health system, which is actually some of the Conservatives actually want to impose on us. We're already seeing, some of the things we used to be able to rely on the NHS for.
In fact, Oliver Letwin actually wrote the book about how to privatise the National Health Service.
Yeah, defund and divest and then force people out and then sell it off, yeah. And the consequence is what you get in America, where you get patient dumping, if somebody's policy runs out, you just stick them on the streets. And if you actually do get, through, and your treatment. The bills are absolutely enormous because it's awful.
Mal, why are the Americans so afraid of socialism?
I've absolutely no idea. I mean,
they're not told the truth about democratic socialism.
No, they're not.
I shouldn't say the Americans.
The gap between rich and poor.
I shouldn't say the Americans, should I? Because it's the American media and political class that have a big thing about socialism.
The gap between the rich and the poor is the greatest in the United States. I think we're about second, aren't we? And I think the most equal society is Japan. Am I talking the right statistics here? But I mean, it's obscene to see that. The poverty in America is disgraceful, the homelessness.
So is the poverty here.
Yes, it's getting worse and worse. I was talking to a lady yesterday, a 99-year-old lady. She was born in 1918, and she had scarlet fever when she was 10 years old, and she said how it had affected the rest of her life. She'd been an invalid, funnily enough, the rest of her life. She'd had a heart attack when she was 19. But she talked to me. She's a fantastic Labour-voting, Corbyn-supporting woman, and she talked to me about what it was actually like to have those kind of childhood illnesses. And we talked about how rickets has returned, malnutrition. A lot of childhood diseases are creeping back now because we are, we're basically second only to America in our because socialism is about the redistribution of wealth, isn't it?
Yeah. And
about a fairer, and that cause Jeremy Corbyn isn't anywhere near. He's a democratic socialist. He's nowhere near the sort of communist thing, is he?
It's about a fairer, more equal society. So you get rid of the absolute you tackle the absolute poverty, homelessness. You give everyone, and if you do that, you make everyone's lives more secure because if you're mortgaged up to your eyeballs and you're a contract worker, you're only a couple of pages.
You were saying, Mal, you were saying something about food banks earlier as well, weren't you?
Oh, it's dreadful. It was announced yesterday, wasn't it, that the government have advised job centres now that they are not allowed to refer people to food banks. This was normally the standard thing once you'd sanctioned somebody for the next 100 days because they'd missed their telephone appointment by 5 minutes.
Or the bus was late.
And then you could refer them on to where they could actually apply for a hardship loan, which had to be paid back at a rate so much more than students have to pay their, rates. Absolutely disgraceful, pushing people into more poverty. And I don't understand. It's insane to think that this is some sort of incentive to find work. Because going back to the working poor again, if you're just scrabbling and galloping on the spot to just pay your bills, and we're talking about the working poor in the sense that when I was talking to this lady yesterday, her father was a miner and her husband was a miner, and she talked to me about some of those working conditions. You worked at 12 hours a day more, and you still were hungry. You still didn't have enough, to live properly, and that's what's happening today.
I now work in the public sector, have done for years, but in the very early 90s, I was living in Bristol, and I was, temping and trying to claim benefit, and I was actually finding if I was, doing the honest thing of declaring the couple of days' work I got here or there, they'd take more off me in benefits than I'd actually earn by actually getting out of bed and going and doing some work for somebody. And, that kind of experience stays with you. I was actually having to go between the sort of various benefit offices to make sure everything that I was entitled to came through. And I know how badly I was treated then. Now it's far, far worse.
It's so punitive, and I mean,
it's all
when we
about
look at how universal credit it's been an absolute disaster, and Labour is going to scrap it. They're going to scrap the bedroom tax. We're going to stop this punishment of people. And now the Tories themselves have actually admitted how many deaths have been caused by their policies.
Yeah, but are you going to be able to persuade Mark Carney to invest money in this country so we create jobs? Because at the end of the day, that's actually what we need, is secure, well-paid jobs. And that seems to be the thing that nobody can achieve. Not a Blair government, not a Major government, not a Thatcher government, none of them.
The Blair government did a lot of good, and it introduced things like the living wage, the minimum wage.
No, but there's always been this massive pool of unemployed people, and that's what you've got to get. If you get rid of that, then surely you've actually achieved something.
Well, let me just say that the idea that we have the lowest unemployment for however many years, those figures include all the people that have died within 6 weeks to 3 months of being found fit to work. They include all the people who have been forced onto work programmes of whatever kind that were completely
zero-hour
unsuitable.
contracts.
Yeah, and the gigging economy and all the rest of it. So in actual fact, they're complete. There's stats and there's stats. But I remember after the last election, there's a self-congratulatory BBC. It was actually on Radio 4 saying, "Oh, in this month, another 38,000 people have, found jobs." That it's a lie. So, and also the thing is, Tony, isn't it true that we have to work less and less? We need the 4-day week with automating, and things are changing now. People are working from home. We need less of that, and we need more quality of life. So I would really like to talk to all the fantastic things that are going on with unconditional universal benefit, where we get rid of the stigma of the
citizens'
welfare
income.
systems.
You mean?
Yeah.
I think it is something we've got to explore, and I think if we tied it into a progressive taxation system that wasn't punitive, it didn't kill aspiration. So progressive taxation shouldn't kill aspiration.
No.
But if you had tied it into a progressive taxation system, if you tied it into absorbed all the benefits, most of the benefits into it as well, it could be a way of ensuring that, without all the bureaucracy of having to, apply for all these benefits online and all the bureaucracy of trying to cheat people out of benefits, if you just paid an amount that actually got people out of absolute destitution, that guaranteed you were safe from destitution.
Yes.
I mean, I almost hesitate to bring up the subject of suicide because, and particularly Bristol University suicides, because if you're looking at what's going on in society, things are getting worse, basically, and pressure is being put on people financially in all sorts of other ways.
Yes.
I also noticed this week, in fact yesterday, a news story about life expectancy. The rise in life expectancy in Scotland has ground to a halt. So it's been inching up and inching up and inching up every single year since World War II. Now it's just levelling out and they believe starting to fall.
But also life expectancy is hugely different in different parts of Bristol.
Yes.
The wealthier areas you live
in, as well.
And different parts of the country, poorer areas, your life expectancy is a lot lower than in richer areas. That tells you all you need to know about. We can't leave this. We have to address it.
So what's the reason for life expectancy falling?
Well, because you have you have more health problems, obviously, because you're not having, your economic situation means that you're not able to look after yourself as well, or your family, or to be, the worst housing situation. Because I can't believe how we have come to the situation in Bristol where you walk in the city centre in the morning and there are bodies lying all around the harbour side, huddled in sleeping bags. It's just absolutely disgraceful. And we're supposed to be a Labour council. And we're not actually looking at...
Whoa, hang on a minute. You can't really blame the Labour Council for this, because we've lost about 75 pence in the pound of money we were getting. So we're doing the best we can with the finances we've got.
This is an example of socialist thinking, right? Now, I would argue that socialist thinking is transferring the sort of thinking that you would have within a family, like caring for children, etc., to a wider society.
Yeah.
Where you say, well, here's a very successful child. We can take something from them to give to some other child that's not so successful, in order to give them both a feeling of some sort of equal value, that they're valued in the same sort of way. And I just don't think the American political class, I think a lot of ordinary Americans understand it, but the political class don't seem to get it at all. Anyway, let's just finish the Donald Trump segment, because that was just in a way I thought it'd be nice to just go into some of the ideas we have here in Britain that don't seem to get any traction whatsoever in the US. In fact, if you go back, say, for example, to the 60s and 70s, I mean, I remember chatting to a lady here in Bristol who used to run Nightstone Housing. Before she was in chair of Nightstone Housing, she used to be in public housing, and she said by the end of the 1970s we'd built enough houses for everyone. So I left public housing. I was sort of astounded, really, to think that there was a house for absolutely everybody. And anyone that didn't have a house could just simply say, I'm homeless, and the council would give them a council flat.
And then along come council house sales, the right to buy, and that was deliberately run to destroy social housing, because councils weren't allowed to use the money they got from selling one house to go and build another replacement. They had to use the money to clear debts.
And what's happened, of course, that we did a Freedom of Information request. And of the 200 local authorities that replied to us, we discovered that about 75% of ex-social housing was actually owned by an absent landlord. Absolutely disgraceful.
So, socialism is about making sure everybody is valued. And what have you got to say about that, Donald Trump? And, of course, he never gets asked that because the American media never ask him it. So, anyway, let's have a listen now to the final. He's sort of crescendo of Donald Trump's State of the Union speech.
We have not yet begun to dream. We must choose whether we are defined by our differences or whether we dare to transcend them. We must choose whether we squander our great inheritance or whether we proudly declare that we are Americans. We do the incredible. We defy the impossible. We conquer the unknown. This is the time to reignite the American imagination. This is the time to search for the tallest summit and set our sights on the brightest star. This is the time to rekindle the bonds of love and loyalty and memory that link us together as citizens, as neighbors, as patriots. This is our future, our fate, and our choice to make. I am asking you to choose greatness. No matter the trials we face, no matter the challenges to come, we must go forward together. We must keep America first in our hearts. We must keep freedom alive in our souls. And we must always keep faith in America's destiny. That one nation, under God, must be the hope and the promise and the light and the glory among all the nations of the world. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that's the conclusion to Donald Trump's speech, State of the Union address in Congress, between his two fasci, the little fascist symbols. Mal, the tallest summit, the brightest star, beginning to dream. It does sound a little bit Disney.
Well, I think whoever's doing the script writing here, it's absolutely sickening. I mean, Fabian and I were just listening to that, and we literally had our fingers down our throats. It was disgusting, wasn't it?
It was borderline delusional.
Yes.
I mean, it was. If you really want to, the American dream is supposed to be that anyone can grow up to be anything they want to be. Well, if you want to make that happen, you tackle the poverty and the absolute poverty. You ensure that everyone gets a decent education.
It's about understanding the universal benefits of education, of healthcare, all of
universal
those things.
healthcare. Yeah, so you don't have anyone going bankrupt if they.
So it's almost cancer. Like there is a sort of hypocrisy at the root of what he's saying here.
Grotesque
in that
hypocrisy of what he's saying.
We really care about people, is what he's saying. We care about people, but actually, it's about survival of the fittest. So if you're really tough in business and ruthless, you can be successful. But unless you are, you're going to start sinking to the bottom. So there's something completely opposed in what he's saying.
I don't like the juxtaposition as well with the sort of the Christianity thing, the
well, as a Christian,
etc. And it's like because they've already made money his god. As you talk about the grotesque hypocrisy and the idiocy of this man, and the reason why he's been put into this position, and how he is a really serious worry and a threat to civilized people everywhere.
So do you think God is listening to him, Fabian, when he says that?
As a Christian, I just totally disown everything he stands for. The Bible was very clear about, defending, looking after the poor, the vulnerable. You were supposed to look after people, and yet you have this American so-called religious right that is literally trampling on the weakest and the most vulnerable, and giving tax cuts to the rich. Absolute antithesis of the gospel, of anything vaguely Christian.
Quite.
Yeah.
Total antithesis.
Something, yes, deeply hypocritical. But anyway, so that's we don't have to endure that for another year, hopefully. But one of the things that's most concerning, I suppose, coming out of that whole speech is really announcing this arms race.
Terrifying.